yet it's taken media's decades to recognise grooming gangs that are coming over and raping our children.
Watch the extraordinary moment a grooming gang survivor interrupts Nigel Farage during a press conference, confronting journalists for, in her view, focusing on the wrong story.
On the comments that Sarah Pochin made, you say they were ugly and were very unpleasant indeed. However, going back to earlier points, can you explain how they're not racist?
I've already said, taken on their own and not in context, you could read them that way. Within the broader picture of this sort of collective madness under the DEI banner that has overcome the advertising industry, that is the context in which they're made. But they were very unwise words to utter in any context, all right? I don't think I can be clearer about that, but I don't believe they had a deep racist intention behind them. If I did, I would have acted differently. And I think if you look, Ben, at my career, over a quarter of a century in public life, you know, I've always made sure, whichever party I've been running or in a senior position, that we didn't align with anything like that at all. And I've been very strict on that. I'm going way back to the early 2000s in that being the view, and one that I've upheld right throughout my time in politics and public life. Okay.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah,
as well?
please do.
I find it quite, overwhelming as well that every single one of these medias has said something about a comment that was made by Sarah, which is understandable, absolutely fine. Yet it's taken media's decades to recognise grooming gangs that are coming over and raping our children because they're white. That is also racially motivated, and it is racist.
Ellie Reynolds, who survived grooming gang abuse, joined Reform UK leader Nigel Farage at a joint press conference, where he announced plans to push for Parliament to launch its own inquiry into grooming gangs. But moments after sharing her emotional testimony, Reynolds appeared visibly frustrated by the line of questioning from journalists.
Harry Farley from the BBC.
Thank you, Mr Farage. Harry Farley from the BBC. The Prime Minister has accused your MP, Sarah Pochin, of shocking racism and the sort of thing that will tear our country apart. Do you accept what Sarah Pochin said was racist, and are you considering any disciplinary action? And on what you've announced today, you were one of the ones leading the call for a national inquiry. Is this not rowing back on what you previously called for?
The BBC's Harry Farley began the questioning, asking about Reform UK MP Sarah Pochin's controversial remarks on race in advertising just minutes after Ellie's emotional address. Here's what Reform UK MP Sarah Pochin said to Talk TV, and Nigel Farage's response.
It drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people, full of, people that basically are anything
What's wrong
other
with that,
than
Sarah?
white.
The words that Sarah Pochin used in response to a caller into Talk Radio on Saturday morning were without ugly and taken on their own, could be read to be very, very unpleasant indeed. I am unhappy with what she has done. I can't underestimate that, and she fully knows how I feel. However, it was in the broader context of DEI madness in the advertising industry, something which anybody with half a brain can recognise has been going on since about 2021. So I understand the basic point, but the way she put it, the way she worded it, was wrong and was ugly. And if I thought that the intention behind it was racist, then I would have taken a lot more action than I have to date. And that is because I don't.
He later did ask a question about grooming gangs, but as other journalists followed up on Pochin, Reynolds' frustration grew, accusing the media of focusing on one form of racism while ignoring another.
I find it quite, overwhelming as well that every single one of these medias has said something about a comment that was made by Sarah, which is understandable, absolutely fine. Yet it's taken media's decades to recognise grooming gangs that are coming over and raping our children because they're white. That is also racially motivated, and it is racist.
In response, GB News' Home and Security editor, Mark White, called the exchange obscene.
Just finally on this point, I think it was all the more disappointing to hear the very first question coming from the BBC to suggest that, the most important thing to take away from this press conference and hearing from a victim was to ask about Sarah Pochin. An important subject, of course, that has been dealt with, but the very first question, after hearing that from Ellie Reynolds to be on Sarah Pochin, I just think was obscene.
I think a lot of people will absolutely concur with that.
GB News' political correspondent Olivia Utley later gave her reaction from the room.
Afternoon, Olivia. I was struck, and I mentioned it to Martin before, about how listening to the incredible testimony and just how eloquent and powerful it was from Ellie Reynolds. At the very first question, then multiple questions afterwards, were all about Sarah Pochin, which to me felt very disrespectful. You were in there. What did you make of that? And I think I gather at one point, Ellie actually called out some of the reporters for the continued questions on Sarah Pochin.
Yes, I mean, to be honest, when I was listening to Ellie Reynolds' very, very brave testimony there, I was thinking of asking a question about Sarah Pochin too, but when I saw Ellie speaking, I realised that that might not be the right thing to do. And as you say, Ellie herself then called out some of those reporters. There was a really fireworks moment where Ellie said that so many of these questions had been about Sarah Pochin's comments on race, and yet the media had been quiet when this very racially motivated issue of sexual abuse was being hushed up over the past decade. Of course, we should say that it was the Times newspapers that revealed this issue in the first place, and of course GB News and other media outlets like it have been chasing it up, but you could see Ellie's real raw frustration there.
This comes amid wider criticism from grooming gang survivors who say their experiences have been sidelined by the institutions meant to protect them. In June, Sir Keir Starmer launched a new national inquiry into grooming gangs, following growing pressure from campaigners. However, the inquiry has faced significant controversy. 4 women, including Ellie Reynolds, resigned from the panel, citing concerns that the process had become, in their words, less about truth and more about a cover-up. The government has denied those claims. Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips insists the inquiry remains committed to exposing institutional failures. Despite the turmoil, officials say the investigation will go ahead, though it could be months before a new chair is appointed after the 2 leading candidates withdrew. For survivors like Ellie Reynolds, the question remains: will this inquiry finally deliver the answers they have waited years to hear? Daniel Smith, GB News.